When Nostradamus first published the Prophecies Nostradamus in 1555, it contained 353 quatrains. The one we are reading now was published after his death in 1568. We can't be sure if the original book grouped quatrains the way we have today, but based on the pattern I found in the book, Century 1 contains warnings of many wars. In Century 1, Nostradamus started with 2 quatrains as his opening statements. The next 7 are about the French Revolution, a reign of terror he wanted to warn his readers about. The cluster of warnings ended with a vivid description of the Russian Revolution. Then the fate of the French monarchy was mentioned again in quatrains 114, 136, 156, and 188, while quatrain 118 and 173 are about the French colony. In quatrain 132, quote, "The great empire will soon be exchanged for a small place," is clearly about Napoleon's exile. And quatrain 157, quote, "The trumpet shakes with great discord, an agreement broken," has long been linked to Napoleon. But now, many people feel it is about Donald Trump. Quatrain 159 is for sure about Napoleon's exile, since the quote, "The exiles deported to the islands at the advent of an even more cruel king," can be referred to no other than Napoleon. Nostradamus's last Napoleon quatrain in Century 1 is quatrain 192, quote, "Under one man, peace will be proclaimed everywhere, but not long after will be looting and rebellion. Because of a refusal, town, land, and sea will be broached. About 1/3 dead are captured. 371,000 soldiers died in combats during Napoleon's war. Of course, much more if you count the lives lost as a direct result of the war. But calling 371,000 1/3 is pretty close." You may wonder, what else did Nostradamus talk about? Other than the 16 French-related quatrains, what else is in the first 100 quatrains? Actually, I found quatrains about Lincoln, Kennedy, and Martin Luther King's assassination, even the mysterious Oak Island treasure, the coming doomsday, and almost every war for the last 450 years. Let's start with quatrain 115. Quote, "Mars threatens us with the force of war, and will cause blood to be split 70 times. The clergy will be both exalted and reviled moreover, by those who wish to learn nothing of them." The first war is found in quatrain 123, which happened right after Nostradamus' death and still not completely over. Quote, "In the 3rd month, at sunrise, the boar and the leopard meet on the battlefield. The fatigued leopard looks up to heaven and sees an eagle playing around the sun." Boars represent Ireland, as it is in its coat of arms, while the leopard is in England's coat of arms. The Desmond rebellions were from 1569 till 1573, followed by the 9 Years' War. Then the rebellions of 1641, then Oliver Cromwell took over between 1649 to 1653. Then the Glorious Revolution of 1688, followed by the Battle of the Boyne in 1690, then the Battle of Aughrim in 1691. When Ireland was spared by war in the 18th century, famine between 1740 and 1741 killed 400,000 and forced 150,000 to leave. Then in 1820 to 1860, 1,956,557 Irish moved to America, with over 100,000 moving to Australia to escape the potato famine, while another 1 million died. During both the 18th and 19th century famine, the fatigued English government looked up to the heavens and probably said, "What God gives, God takes away," and did nothing to save the people in Ireland. The eagle represented the 2 million Irish that moved to America, while another million refused to move, and they eventually died of hunger. The conflicts between England and Ireland continue to this day. The next war quatrain is 128, quote, "Tobruk will fear the barbarian fleet for a time, then much later the western fleet. Cattle, people, possessions, all will be quite lost. What a deadly combat in Taurus and Libra." In December 1940, the British defeated the Italians during Operation Compass and trapped the remnants at Beta Foam. Then the Axis siege of Tobruk began in 1941, which lasted 241 days with losses of 18,285. Tobruk sustained heavy damages from bombing. Eventually, the Allied forces returned in November 1941 under Operation Crusader. In 4 lines, Nostradamus described the barbarian fleet's siege, the retake by Western fleet, and the damages and its deadly tolls. Nostradamus predicted all these 400 years before the conflict started. How did he know? I believe quatrain 130 is about Pearl Harbor. Quote, "Because of the storm at sea, the foreign ship will approach an unknown port, notwithstanding the signs of the palm branches. Afterwards, there is death and pillage. Good advice comes too late." The surprise attack happened at 7:48 a.m. on December 7th, 1941. With 353 Imperial Japanese fighter planes, bombers, and torpedo planes, they bombarded Pearl Harbor in 2 waves. Planes were launched from 6 aircraft carriers. That is the, quote, "foreign ship" mentioned in the quatrain. While Pearl Harbor is the port with signs of palm branches. If the intelligence report did not come too late, death and pillage may be mostly avoided. Unfortunately, it came too late. All 8 U.S. Navy battleships were damaged, with 4 being sunk, and 2,403 lives were lost. Quatrain 131 is also very interesting. The war in France will last for so many years, beyond the reign of the Castellan kings. An uncertain victory will crown 3 great ones: the eagle, the cock, the moon, the lion, and the sun in its house. I believe the war in France mentioned here is World War II, as it is after the era of the kings. As for France, the victory did not come with glory, but with uncertainty. France lost most of its colonies, while after the war, it is not one of the 3 major powers left. The eagle represents the United States. The moon, the former USSR as it is in its flag. The cock is China, as the map of China is shaped like a rooster. Some researchers have said that quatrain 133 is about Hitler. I don't see a strong link other than the mention of austere city, which is where Hitler was born. Quote, "Near a great bridge, near a spacious plain, the great lion with the imperial forces will cause a falling outside the austere city. Through fear the gate will be unlocked for him." Quatrain 137 is also about World War II. This time it is about Pearl Harbor. Quote, "Shortly before sunset, battle is engaged. A great nation is uncertain. Overcome, the seaport makes no answer, the bridge and the grave both in foreign places. The Pearl Harbor attacks happened from 7:48 a.m. till 10 a.m. Everyone knows the attacks started in the morning. However, was the battle being engaged when Japan sent out the submarines carriers the evening before? The first missed alarm was at 3:42 a.m. when U.S. minesweeper Condor noticed, quote, sighted submerged submarine on westerly course, speed 9 knots. And the quote uses sunset versus the word sunset. Could the sun mean the Empire of Japan and set means ready for war? Before the attack, the United States was not sure whether it wanted to go to war with Japan or not. So the great nation is uncertain. And the Japanese forces really faced no resistance at Pearl Harbor attack. As quoted, overcome, the seaport makes no answer. Quatrain 138, quote, the sun and the eagle will appear to the victor, an empty answer assured to the defeated. Neither bugle nor shouts will stop the soldiers. Liberty and peace, if achieved in time through death. We all know World War II ended when Japan surrendered. So what was the calling of sun and victor? The sun represented Japan and the eagle is the United States. Although Japan surrendered unconditionally, they were allowed to keep their emperor. They were not asked to pay any restitution. Are they defeated? Not really. Japan defeated China, Korea, and all the Asian countries. Japan was only defeated by USA's atomic bombs. After World War II, Japan's Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution outlawed war to settle international disputes and agreed to keep only Japan's self-defense forces in Japan. However, those restrictions were lifted when President George W. Bush asked Japan to join forces in the Second Iraqi War. To the Asian countries defeated by Japan, that is the empty promise broken. Quatrain 140 and 143 should be about the Ottoman Empire. It is hard to pinpoint the exact period, as the Ottoman Empire's history was basically written in blood. Quatrain 144 is about several assassinations that shock the world. Quote, in a short time sacrifices will be resumed. Those opposed will be put to death like martyrs. They will no longer be monks, abbots, or novices. Hone should be far more expensive than wax. Martin Luther King Jr., an American Baptist minister and leader in the Civil Rights Movement, was killed on April 4th, 1968. 2 months later, on June 6th, 1968, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. There is no ministers in Nostradamus' time, so the best he can do is call them monks or the abbots. While both of them died as martyrs, they were sacrificed in such a short time. Even JFK was only assassinated 3 years before that. Isn't the quatrain right on?
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream.
Then Nostradamus talked about another assassination, the plot against President Lincoln. Quatrain 145, quote, a founder of sex, much trouble for the accuser. A beast in the theater prepares the scene and plot. The author ennobled by act of older times. The world is confused by schismatic sex. Of course, the clue is the beast in theater prepares the scene and plot, as Lincoln was killed in the plot carried out in the theater by John Booth Wilkes. The next war is the 1701 French-Spanish Succession War in Quatrain 149, quote, long before these happenings. The people of the East, influenced by the moon, in the year 1700 will cause many to be carried away and will almost subdue the North Sea. This war involved Scotland and the Dutch, just as the North Sea is mentioned. It also involves the Holy Roman Empire, which is from the East. These fit in like pieces of a puzzle. Then quatrain 155 may be about the Iraqi War. Quote, "In the land with a climate opposite to Babylon, there will be great shedding of blood. Heaven will seem unjust both on land and sea and in the air. Sex, famine, kingdoms, plagues, confusion." The war was from sea, land, and air with great loss of lives. While after the US-led occupation, sectarian wars started, just as stated in the quatrains. Now, let's look at quatrain 160, quote, "An emperor will be born near Italy, who will cost the empire very dearly. They will say, when they see his allies, that he is less a prince than a butcher." Many researchers believe this quatrain is about Hitler, because Hitler was born in Austria, which is not far from Italy. But he was not an emperor nor a prince, although you can definitely call him a butcher. To me, that is not evidence enough to pin this prophecy to Hitler. However, I think quatrain 161 is about Jews during World War II, with my belief that Nostradamus's groupings related quatrains together. The interpretation of the next quatrain is quite controversial. Quatrain 161, quote, "The wretched, unfortunate republic will again be ruined by a new authority. The great amount of ill will accumulated in exile will make the Swiss break their important agreement." Many consider this a depiction of the slaughter of the Jews during World War II and the Swiss banks' taking of their unclaimed properties. What do you think? Quatrain 63 is about the coming World War III. Quatrain 163, quote, "Pestilences extinguished. The world becomes smaller. For a long time the lands will be inhabited peacefully. People will travel safely through the sky, over land and seas. 10 wars will start up again." The only long period of peacetime when people travel through the sky is the years after World War II. So it could mean now. Is this a warning of coming wars? Then in quatrain 170, it gave a vivid description of the Iranian Revolution. Quote, "Rain, famine, and war will not cease in Persia. Too great a faith will betray the monarch. Those actions started in France will end there. A secret sign for on to be sparing." The 1979 revolution that overthrew the Pahlavi dynasty was by Khomeini, the Shia cleric Khomeini. Just as stated, quote, "Faith will betray the monarch." Although there can be many different interpretations on this, but I think mine is really good. Quatrain 178, quote, "To an old leader will be born an idiot heir, weak both in knowledge and in war. The leader of France is feared by his sister. Battlefield divided, conceded to the soldiers." I think the first line is about the second President Bush. And the third line is to remind us how strongly France was against the Iraq invasion and how upset France's sister country, the America, felt at that time. Perfect decoding, right? The next is about Saddam and ISIS. Quatrain 194, quote, "The tyrant Selim will be put to death at the harbor, but liberty will not be regained. However, a new war arises from vengeance and remorse. A lady is honored through force of terror." I believe the tyrant Selim is Saddam. He was put to death 364 miles to the oceans, so I'm not sure what harbor meant. but that was the time when President Bush calling, quote, whoever harbors the terrorist. Saddam was killed at a place which harbored the terrorist. Is that what Nostradamus meant? But liberty for sure not regained, and I think the quote of "a lady is honored" is referring to the name of ISIS, as Lady Goodness Isis bears the same name as the terror group ISIS, which rose with force of terror after the vengeance of a post-Saddam Iraq conflicts. The last war quatrain in Century 1 is not a big battle, but was depicted with stunning details. Quatrain 198, quote, the leader who will conduct great numbers of people, far from their skies to foreign customs and language. 5,000 will die in Crete and Thessaly. The leader fleeing in a seagoing supply ship. The Battle of Crete in 1941 began on the morning of 20 May 1941, when Nazi Germany began an airborne invasion of Crete. Allied forces withdrew to the south coast. Over half were evacuated by the British Royal Navy. The remainder surrendered or joined the Crete resistance. 4,123 Allied troops and 1,915 Germans died in this conflict, pretty close to the 5,000 predicted by Nostradamus. Nostradamus has many other quatrains about wars, but almost all the wars were covered in Century 1. I think Nostradamus tried to warn us on all these conflicts when he wrote Century 1. And in his Century 2, he talked more of the doomsday to come. This is Ken Peters. Thank you for watching.